Hey guys, welcome back to yet another video. As you guys know, we are quickly approaching the end of the year 2021, so I thought that a good way to wrap up the year and commemorate everything would be to look back and see some of the best movies of the past year. So what I'm going to be doing today is I'm going to be ranking the 10 best movies of 2021, in my opinion. And the emphasis in this is in my opinion because some of the movies that I like may not be universally the best movies ever made, but in my opinion, they are the ones that I enjoyed and I thought were well made, so it is a subjective list. And the other thing you should know before I get into this is obviously I haven't seen every movie ever made in 2021. I ended up watching 34 films that were released this year, which isn't a terrible number. I know one of my friends watched like 70 or something, which is just insane. But I did watch a decent amount, so I have a fairly good grasp on what movies I enjoyed this year. There were a couple that I wanted to watch but just didn't get around to. For example, I wanted to watch The Last Duel. That's one that I unfortunately couldn't get around to in time. But you'll see on the screen here, these are the movies that I have watched this year that are under consideration. And yeah, without any further ado, let's get into the list. So at number 10, I have a film that I actually just watched yesterday as of the recording date of this video, and that is The French Dispatch. This is a very interesting film for several reasons. For one, it's not the most mainstream of films, it's kind of more of a indie art house type thing, and I really love the visual style of this film. The contrast between black and white, and then there's like the pastel color palettes, I really enjoyed that. Sometimes switching between color and black and white got a little distracting, and I was like, why are they switching between these two? There must be some sort of significance. And so that kind of took me out of the stories at some points. But aside from that, I really loved it. I love the camera, how the camera is used in this film. Like, it feels like more of an actual character than in any film that I can remember watching recently. Like, the camera's always moving. It's almost always positioned like in front of the actor, kind of like what I'm doing right now. They're almost talking into the camera. So it really brings you more into the movie, and I really loved how the camera was used, and the cinematography in this film was fantastic. In terms of the actual story itself, there's basically three main plots that it follows. There's an artist, and then there's this like youth rebellion, and then there's this guy going over to a cop, and they like witness his son's kidnapping. And so I really loved the first and the third of those stories, but the second story, it was pretty boring to me. I wasn't really invested in any of the characters in those. The film overall was pretty funny, however this story kind of fell flat on that front as well, so I would have liked to get a different story because that one was kind of boring, and I was like, come on, can we get to the next thing here? Like, it was pretty boring in my opinion, so I didn't love that aspect of the film. I did really like the first story and the third story, so at least they started strong and ended strong, but the middle is where they kind of lost me and where I didn't really love the film, which is why it's held back from being any higher on this list. It's still a good film that I enjoyed, but it's not the best. Moving on up to the next film on my list, at number 9, I have Shang-Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings. By the way, quick disclaimer here, I have reviewed some of these on my channel, so I'll leave tags for any of those, but yeah, this one I have reviewed on my channel before, and I really love Marvel. I think that's pretty clear if you guys have watched the channel before, so I wasn't too looking forward to this film because it's a new character, I didn't really know him, but the action scenes of this film are fantastic. That's what really made this such a great film in my opinion, was the action choreography and cinematography were beautiful. Like I said in my ranking the MCU videos for 2021, I think that the bus scene and the skyscraper scene are some of the best action scenes that we've seen in the MCU in general, and so that was the stuff that really made me enjoy this film. And just in general, Shang-Chi is a decent character. I liked him in this film. I didn't love Awkwafina's character. She feels unnecessary, but the villain, the Mandarin, I liked him. I think he's one of the best villains to come out of Marvel this year, the obvious frontrunner being Green Goblin. But aside from that, he was solid, and he's probably up there in terms of MCU villains, and so I really enjoyed him. He made this movie enjoyable as well. And just in general, this was a fun movie. I really liked it. I don't have too many negative complaints besides Awkwafina, but it's just not the best film I've seen this year. So as we move closer to the top film on this list, at number 8, I have No Time to Die, which is obviously the final Bond film in the Daniel Craig era of Bond films. And I enjoyed this film. This is a really solid action movie. I think that the way that Bond's character is like handled in this film is fantastic. I love that he is able to kind of make amends with a lot of the struggles in his past, and then he dies at the end, obviously, which I think was a great end for his character. In terms of action, we got some solid action scenes in this, some great set pieces. The cinematography was pretty good as well in this film. And I don't know, I don't have many negatives about this one either. A lot of these films, obviously, they are my favorite films of the year, so it's tough to find negatives about some of these. It's just, this film isn't the most enjoyable, and it's not even my favorite Daniel Craig Bond film. My favorite is Skyfall. This film's good, but I think that just kind of everything that this film does good, Skyfall does better, which is why this isn't any higher on my list, even though Skyfall obviously isn't from this year. If there's a better film in the same franchise, can't really rank this any higher. So yeah, that's why it's ranked at number 8 on this list. And moving on to number 7 on this list is Ghostbusters Afterlife. I really enjoyed this film, actually. I was not expecting to enjoy this film as much as I did. I thought it was going to be solid. I thought that it wasn't going to hold up to the originals. It was obviously going to be better than the 2016 version of Ghostbusters, but it's a fun film. There's a lot of great callbacks to the originals. Like, obviously the plot itself is very reminiscent of the first one with the whole Gozer, and then there's the gatekeeper and all that type of stuff. It rehashes a lot on some of the stuff of the original, which sometimes stuff like that, like there's a lot of fan service in this film in particular. Fan service sometimes gets in the way of a good plot or a good movie. In this case, I don't think it did. I think that this film didn't rely too much on it. Like, it would tease some stuff like, oh, here's the Ecto 1 car, or oh, here's the ghost trap. Or it would have obviously references to like the Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and stuff like that. I think that personally added to the film, in my opinion. It didn't rely too much on it. It was still its own film. Like, without the original, I think this is still a good film. It's just being able to have that fan service to the original is what made it even more interesting, in my opinion. The other thing that made this film so good, in my opinion, is the ghostbusting scenes. I thought that this is some of the funnest ghostbusting scenes that we've ever had, because obviously these films aren't meant to be taken too seriously. They're supposed to be fun, lighthearted comedies. And so seeing a fun, like, kids version of ghostbusting was really enjoyable. I loved the scene where they're trying to chase the Muncher ghost and they're all driving around town on the Ecto 1 chasing that ghost. That was a really fun scene, probably the best ghostbusting scene, in my opinion, in the franchise. And so that's another reason why I enjoyed this film so much. So moving on to number 6, I have a film that I wasn't expecting to like this much, which was Stillwater. And Stillwater was a film I hadn't heard a whole lot about before I watched it. I had heard like a couple reviews saying that it wasn't great. I honestly don't remember what those reviews said in particular, but I thought it was a really good film. I, for some reason, didn't write any of my thoughts down after watching it. I didn't review this on the channel, so I don't remember what my thoughts are. I watched this several months ago, so I'm just kind of winging it here. I really liked the story. I really liked Matt Damon's character. He was not the most likable of guys, but that's okay. Your protagonist doesn't always have to be the most likable of characters. He had a clear goal, and I really loved the dynamic between him and the little girl. I can't remember what the little girl's name was, but I really loved the dynamic there. And then in the end, obviously, he kidnaps the guy that he thinks is responsible for the crime that his daughter was framed of committing. And that divide and that like lying to his new family, I guess if you want to call it that, is what led to his downfall with the little girl. And I know I'm rambling and none of this makes sense. I apologize for that. I really like this film. I think it was a great film. It very much reminded me of neorealism, which is one of the film movements that I personally love. I love that style of filmmaking, and this very much reminded me of that, especially in the second and third acts. And so that was one of the things that made me enjoy this film so much, and just in general, I thought it was a tight narrative. I liked the characters. Even if they're not the most enjoyable of characters, I still liked them as characters. But yeah, this segment probably isn't very great. I apologize for that. Go watch the film for yourself, because I obviously didn't do it justice in this synopsis thing here. So moving on to number 5 here, I have The Suicide Squad. And I went into viewing this film very wary because I had heard great things about it. But obviously DC doesn't have a great track record. James Gunn, he's done great stuff with the Guardians film, so I was like, this could either be great or this could be god-awful. Luckily, it was a very strong film. I really enjoyed it. I think that this is the best film that DC has ever made. And knowing DC, they're probably not going to greenlight another James Gunn project because that's just the way they are. But this film was great because it didn't take itself too seriously, but it had a constant tone, which DC has struggled with a lot. They like to be funny, but serious and dark at the same time. It's like, pick a lane, guys. This one picked a lane of being over-the-top absurd, crazy graphic violence, language, everything. And that's what made it so enjoyable, is that it was, first of all, the action scenes were fantastic. I loved the Harley Quinn fight scene in particular, where she's escaping the prison. Fight scenes were great in this. Cinematography was fantastic as well. And just in general, James Gunn brought a very unique style to this film that I loved. Like, I really liked his title card especially, and how the plot was kind of non-linear. And just in general, the characters were so much more enjoyable in this than a lot of other DC films. I really liked Ratcatcher too. She was the emotional core of this film, and just in general, this is a great film that I really enjoyed again, which is obviously why it's at number 5 on this list. Better than The Suicide Squad, though, is the number 4 movie on this list, which is Tick, Tick, Boom. And this is another movie that took me completely off guard because I was not expecting to enjoy this nearly as much as I did. I've been pretty public on this channel about I don't love musicals, so I went into this film, I just knew that Andrew Garfield was in it, and I like Andrew Garfield as an actor, and I like him even more after this film because he did phenomenal in this film, both in singing and just regular acting. So that's the reason I watched this film, and after watching it, I loved it. First of all, obviously, like I said, his performance was incredible. The songs are very catchy, especially 3090. That's one that I've actually listened to like several times, even weeks after watching this film. And just in general, this is a different type of musical than I think I'm used to because the songs actually, first of all, fit the universe. They didn't just come out of nowhere, and it's like, that's the main problem I have with songs and musicals is they just come out of nowhere and it doesn't feel real. I like a movie feeling like a real world, and the songs in this fit the actual world, which I enjoyed, and also they move the plot forward. Every time, well, I'm not gonna say every time, mostly every time I watch a musical, it feels like every time they start singing, the plot just goes on complete standstill for a while. And that's another thing I don't like because I like the plot to be moving. I like things to happen for a reason in movies. And so this one, actually, the songs added to the film, which doesn't usually happen in musicals. So that was something else that I really enjoyed about this film. And just in general, it was a very relatable story, I guess, for me personally, because it's a guy who's struggling to be a theater writer. Obviously, I'm not a theater writer, but I try to make short films and stuff like that. So just in general, being a creative person and making stuff and it not being recognized by other people, that's something that I could relate to. And I think that in general, John Larson was a very compelling character. And just in general, I think that this is a really fantastic film. I wanted to actually watch more musicals after watching this film because I'm like, hey, if this musical can be so good, maybe others can be good as well. So being a film that's a genre that I don't enjoy and making me want to actually go out and watch more of that same genre is something that cannot be said by a lot of films. So props to this film. That's why it's ranked so high on this list. Now moving on to number 3, a film that I had very high expectations going in for, and that is Dune. And I will say, I think that Dune is the most well technically made film on this list because the cinematography, the acting, the sound design, the locations, all of that stuff in this film is fantastic. It's phenomenal. The cinematography is beautiful, the lighting is fantastic in every scene, acting is on point all the time. And in terms of the plot, I think that some people do say that it's a little dry and a little long and a little boring. I don't think that. I actually love the plot of this film because the world building and lore that they have included in this film and interwoven into everything is phenomenal. I want to know more about this world that they've created. I actually bought the books for that reason because I want to get to know more about this universe. It seems like a fantastic universe that I really would enjoy getting to see more movies on and obviously reading the books. The only complaint I have about it that holds it back from being higher than the first 2 films on this list is that it doesn't have as much of an emotional impact as the two others on this list because I didn't really connect to the characters too much, and that's just the only thing that held it back. It's a great story, fantastically made from a technical standpoint, just it's missing that kind of emotional connection that I feel for characters in some of these other films. So moving on to number 2, I have Spider-Man No Way Home. And if you've watched any of my other No Way Home stuff, initially I didn't like this film. It probably wouldn't have even made the top 10 list, but after watching it a second and a third time, I love everything about it. It is fantastic. It was everything I could have asked for in a Spider-Man movie. We got to see all 3 of our Spider-Mans. We got to see 5 major villains from the previous films. And just, it was incredible. It added to everyone's story from those 8 other Spider-Man films without taking away from their initial stories, which I loved. I was kind of worried that maybe they're going to ruin the connections that these characters have with their previous movies, but they didn't do that. They took that stuff into consideration and they built upon that, which was fantastically done. The action scenes were great. I love every single interaction between Tom, Andrew, and Tobey's Spider-Man. I think those were all great. And just in general, this movie is fantastic. I love Green Goblin as a villain. And the way that they ended it with Peter's character, Tom's Peter obviously, is great because we finally get to see a classic version of Spider-Man in the MCU, not like a mini Iron Man. So just everything about this film was fantastic. I have loved Spider-Man. He's my favorite character in the MCU and my favorite character in Marvel, I guess. So I was really happy to see this film and it was perfect. However, you will notice that it's not the best film on this list, and that is because at the number 1 spot, I have The Mitchells vs. the Machines, which is a film that I was not expecting to love. I went into this with 0 expectations. I hadn't even heard of it until a YouTuber I watched recommended it. He was just like, this is a good film. So I was like, may as well watch it. It was amazing. I love everything about this film. I can't do it justice by talking about it here. It's on Netflix, go watch it. Obviously go watch all of these films, but if you're gonna choose just one on these lists that you probably haven't seen yet, The Mitchells vs. Machine is incredible because this is the most relatable a character has ever been for me. I loved Katie's character. Her relationship with her father was fantastic. It had some great emotional impacts. There's one scene in particular where she's watching this camcorder. That brings me to tears. It brought me to tears both times I watched this film. I've watched this film twice this year. And it's fantastic. It's a great scene. There's great relationships between all of the characters. And then on top of that, it's a fun comedy as well. They perfectly balance comedy with crushing emotion. And it's just done so brilliantly. Some of the jokes, I will admit, don't land and go a little too over the top for me. But that's the only complaint I have about this film. Besides that, it's amazing. The cinematography, if you want to call it that, I'm not sure what it's actually called in an animated movie, but the shots are beautiful as well a lot of the time. It's got a unique style that, again, sometimes goes a little over the top, but it's cool. And just in general, I love Katie's character. I love the relationships between the 4 major family members. And this is the most emotionally impacting film that has stuck with me throughout this whole year, while also being entertaining, which is why it's worthy of the number 1 spot on this list. But yeah, those are my top 10 films of 2021. I hope you guys enjoyed this. Let me know what your top 10 films, or just your favorite film, I guess, would be of this year. Tomorrow, I'm also going to be posting a video where I go over some of the most anticipated movies of 2022. I'm excited for that video, so if you guys are excited for that as well, make sure you leave a like down below. Subscribe if you are new around here and want to see videos like that, and like this obviously. If you want more updates on my videos, make sure to follow me on Instagram at ntd_films. Thank you guys all for watching, and have a good day.